Hi, everybody. Thank you to our final event this academic year. My name is Leslie Shoemaker, and I am just so delighted that you're able to attend our talk today to look at the hidden benefits of the pandemic and how this has impacted ICT, engineering, as well as apprenticeship. So I welcome you, and I'm going to hand this over to Rebecca Jones, the architect of the Building Esteem program here in TU Dublin.
Thank you, Leslie. I'm privileged to be here today and to collaborate alongside all these amazing women that are in the team together. Therese Fitzgerald, she's the Access to Apprenticeship project officer, and she works with the Women Building Your Future. Amy Mould, who unfortunately couldn't be here today, she's an engineering lecturer in Tala campus. Michelle Luby is a founder of Women in Technology and United and also an engineering lecturer in Blanchardstown campus. And of course, our Leslie Shoemaker here, and she's been the driver and founder of the Esteem project. And I'm delighted to collaborate with her on the Building Esteem. And we just want to take this opportunity as a team to congratulate Leslie on being a member of the Convene team. So well done on that. Okay, so thank you so much and welcome everybody today and joining us. Those that are home are watching, whether it's in the education setting, further ed, secondary schools, and all our TU Dublin students, we are absolutely thrilled to be here. This is the last of an 8-part series. This is the last of our academic year, and we look forward to seeing you again in the future. So I just think that this is a great topic to talk about. The topic is about the hidden benefits of the pandemic. And it's really good at this transition time coming into, you know, what the new normal is going to look like for us all, but specifically for women in IT, apprenticeships and computing and engineering as well. So without further ado, I would like to introduce our keynote speaker. And then I'm going to introduce our amazing 3 expert panelists. And then I'm going to get Michelle to speak about a survey that's really important for you guys to fill in at the end. So Deirdre is going to be given our keynote speaker. We are so lucky to have you. Thank you so much. You've always been a fantastic to support. I've known you a couple of years and you've always been a great support. So thanks so much. Deirdre is the Convene lead. Actually, you're the director and Convene lead for Enterprise Academy at TU Dublin, and you're also a board member for the Higher Education Authority. So you're very welcome, and thank you very much for joining us. And our 3 panelists that we have here today, we have Ashling Lee. She is an engineer and a technical architecture specialist in Accenture. And just to give a bit of background about Ashling, Ashling came from, her journey was an electric apprentice back in DIT. And then she graduated with the TU 821, that's the course code, as an electrical apprentice with her degree in TU Dublin as well. And she's actually undertaking a master's as well. So that's Ashling's educational story there. So you're very welcome, Ashling. David Edwards. Thanks, David, for joining us today. David, I didn't realize you also, your roots is in the apprenticeship as well. So that's fantastic. So thank you, David. And David is the ABB manager of smart buildings, smart power, and the commercial lead for Ireland for ABB. So you're very welcome. And Ray English is is here with us in TU Dublin. He's the team leader, practice-based skills and apprenticeship in TU Dublin, and he's also the chair of the World Skills Ireland and technical delegate to the World Skills International. So thanks Ray for joining us again. Okay, great. So if I hand you over to Deirdre, who's going to give us our keynote open remarks. Thank you.
Sure. Thanks a million, Rebecca, and thanks to Leslie and Michelle. A huge fan of Esteem. My own background, I think I was one of 3 females in a class of 70 in UCC, one of the first people ever to go through it to do a computer science degree, you know, and just you know, the idea of having a role model or a mentor would have been, you know, a completely alien concept. So I think it's a fabulous program, and going from strength to strength. So well done on that. I think today's topic is brilliant. Actually, it really got me thinking, you know, and, you know, in terms of the benefits from the pandemic, you know, I think maybe kind of big picture in it, I think the world learned how to work together, which I think was, you know, a really, really big thing, you know, kind of transcending nationalities to solve a major global crisis, you know. And I think some of the real benefits, like people were prepared to sacrifice personally for the greater good, you know. A lot of people lost their jobs, lost their careers, their lives work, but were still prepared to go with the lockdowns, you know, to protect probably the more vulnerable in our societies. So I think there's a huge benefit from that. I think we trusted our public health systems and our governments. You know, that's not universal across the globe, you know, and I think there was something really powerful in Ireland around the community coming together around that. And we saw as well the role that universities could play in that kind of national response, you know. And I think one thing really that struck me throughout, and I think is really relevant for the work of STEAM, you know, that principle of fairness, you know, that everybody got the same opportunity but abided by the same rules, I think was really, really important. You know, it really sort of leveled the playing pitch, whether you were a billionaire or, you know, unemployed, you had to follow the same set of rules, you know. So and I think we're starting to see it again in sort of the international response to the Ukraine crisis, you know, the invasion, and the world again is uniting around a major issue, and we're seeing the power of information and technology to bring people together in that sort of response. So I think there's the kernel of something really important happening both in COVID and Ukraine, and I think we really need to learn from it, because we're going to need to do this again for climate action and for the challenges that are coming down the line. So, you know, this idea of even stepping back today to think about it is really important. So I suppose in particular technology, which is my own background, what role did technology play and what were the benefits? You know, I think in lots of ways we actually became less dependent on it, you know, that the pace of life sort of slowed and people, I think, became more patient, probably kinder, had more time for their family and their friends, you know. I think they got out into nature more, they walked, they'd probably a better quality of life than maybe sitting in the 2-hour commute, constantly checking, you know, text messages for the next email or whatever. And so I think there is that unseen impact, I think, which is maybe the desire to disconnect from technology at times is stronger. And we're even seeing that come through now as sort of almost a right to disconnect, that when you go home in the evening and when your time is your own now, you know, that you shouldn't be on call for your employer or even your university course, you know. So, and then I suppose on the flip side of it, you know, in terms of technology, I think in lots of ways we became far more dependent on it, because if you think about the lockdowns, if we hadn't had things like Teams and Zoom and WhatsApp, I think it would have become very, very fragmented very quickly, in fairness, you know. So, you know, and I think we saw even the older generation kind of had to use it, you know, needs must. If they wanted to see their grandkids, they needed to learn how to use WhatsApp or something, you know, in a video format, you know. But I think one of the really interesting things out of the pandemic was some of the research is showing that the late 20s and early 30s, that generation were actually lonelier during lockdown than the elderly, you know. So I think there's a real take home there that we need to look at, you know, that, and why was that? Was it because they were so connected to their workplace and connected to their friends that the social piece came in around that or whatever? But that's a real take home for me, and I think there's a real warning sign there that we need to pick up on, you know. I think as well, some of the research would say that there were, like, while society as a whole did very well in terms of its response, within that there were, you know, significant minority groups that were very, very unhappy and still are with the way things have panned out, you know. So I think, you know, in terms, again, maybe going back to the gender agenda and sort of females in technology and females in industries that, you know, where they're underrepresented, you know, unseen impacts. Again, I think, you know, people with caring responsibilities, whether it was mothers or fathers or whatever, anybody who had a caring responsibility thing was probably disproportionately impacted, you know, because that responsibility came home with you, with your work, you know, no childcare, you know, all of that had impacts, you know. But at the flip side of that, then, to be positive, you know, I think there's a lot of career opportunities have opened up because of remote working. You don't necessarily have to spend the 2 hours commuting into Dublin city centre for a real good career opportunity. You know, you might only have to do that a day or two a week, you know. So that whole idea that location has become much less important, we really need to seize that, I think. And, you know, something like 40% of people are thinking of changing roles at the moment, just post-pandemic. So there are going to be a lot of different opportunities opening up for people. And I suppose, you know, for me, a lot of it was brought home. My own niece, Emma, she was one of the Leaving Cert, you know, that was first impacted by COVID, and has gone on to do the first 2 years of her college education in UL in this sort of really, you know, stop-start, socially distant sort of lockdown type environment, you know. And, you know, initially when I was looking, I said, God, she's going to miss out on so much here. But like, she's thriving. She's learned so much about being resilient, about, you know, making connections, about, you know, trying to, you know, make the best of a bad lot, you know, that I think in the longer term, that's really going to stand to her, you know. So I think it's a great topic. I think there's so much we can learn from it, and it'll probably take, you know, a little bit of time now, once we've come out of the lockdowns, you know, back to a normality. I really hope we capture things like, you know, remote working, definitely, that work-life balance piece, that disconnect from technology and the right to do that. I think I question, maybe universities, have they learned as much as they could? I think we're flipping back to a 9-to-5 mode too quickly. I think there's a lot that the tech industry and other industries can learn, you know. But I would say to everybody here, you know, it was a tough 2 years, particularly if you were young and in that Leaving Cert into college transition. But I think you've learned so much more than you've actually would have learned if you'd gone through the standard route. And, you know, I think that will absolutely stand to you going forward. So they're just some of my thoughts, really, probably in no particular order, but it was a really interesting thing to think about, you know. So thank you very much for the opportunity. Hand back to Rebecca there, sorry.
Thank you, Deirdre. Thanks so much for that, and giving us a foundation as well on what we're going to discuss with this panel. Yeah, and even what you talked about there about the connected world and the right to connect, it really resonates with me as well, and a lot of our colleagues here. Yeah, so thank you so much. Okay, great. So we're going to kick it off, our discussion. And if I start with a question, and I'm going to ask the same question for everybody. So if we go to Ashling first, Ashling, what has been the biggest or the single biggest hidden benefit of the pandemic for your industry?
I think for the IT industry, specifically where I'm focused in at the moment, is the pandemic really broke the wheel, right? That we were all stuck in that humdrum, exactly as Deirdre was saying. You know, you get in your car or the bus or the train in the morning, you commute in, you sit at your desk from 9 to 5 or whatever your work hours are, you do your job and you go home, you're stuck in traffic, you have to make your dinner, you might have something to do in the evening, you might have kids to look after, whatever, and you're kind of in this rat race or this routine that you're just working towards to the weekend. And as one of the big, you know, buzzwords that's been bandied around, it's the great shift, right? At the moment, we're seeing the model of work that we've been in to date has been completely, you know, revamped and, you know, being reviewed, and it's allowing people to bring their best self to work, because they're allowed to say, well, you know, I don't from the shops, or, you know, you're not worried about, right, I have to dress, you know, very formal to go and meet my client today. You know, you can sit at home in your pajamas and
I think we're having trouble there with Ashling. We might just quickly go to Ray there. Ray, could you?
Sure, Rebecca.
So what the question was, what has been the single biggest hidden benefit of the pandemic for your industry?
You know, I think if we step back and look at the start of the pandemic in 2019, I think one of the things that quickly came out was recognition and appreciation for skills that we just taken for granted. So, you know, when we started queuing outside shops, all of a sudden we started to appreciate those in retail sales. We got an understanding for logistics and the supply chain and that interconnectivity. You know, I think that was really important that we all started to recognize, well, there's a whole world of skills and careers out there that we don't actually know. We all started working at home, which was being pointed out. There was a sudden rush to get laptops and computers to everybody. And all of a sudden the ICT support became really important. And those people were able to connect into where, you know, devices remotely and fix things up for us. And as Deirdre pointed out, Zoom and WhatsApp became really important tools. But we got to appreciate also later in the pandemic, things like cybersecurity, which were always in the background, and cloud computing. And they really came to the fore. And it's really interesting, I think, that all of those careers that I've mentioned are now all apprenticeships, you know, within the state here. So it's really interesting of that kind of growth now is almost parallel. Wherever you want to take your education, an apprenticeship, further education, or higher education, you'll find each one of those as a skill set within there. And I think for me, that's the biggest thing. It's a deepening of the understanding of skills, careers, and the interconnectivity. And I think as Deirdre pointed out, the chance that people have now is to use those skill sets and expand on them and grow.
Absolutely, Ray, that interconnectivity and that skill set, and that's what employers are looking for now is the skill sets that people have. So thanks very much. David, can you answer that question, please? What is the single biggest hidden benefit of the pandemic for your industry?
Yeah, I mean, just to touch on what Ray said there, I mean, if we look back, say 3 years, and we talked about remote working for employees in Ireland, I mean, we would have been talking about something in the future. So something that's done in Sweden or one of these European countries. But I think needs must, and I think that probably the single biggest benefit for the industry was that remote working. And I mean, I am conscious that there were some industries that weren't, they couldn't move to remote working. But I mean, for the electrical, or my industry, electrical industry, we were seen as frontline workers in some of the installation we worked. We had, for our own business here, we have 150 employees here in Ireland. 85% of those we had to get remote working within 1 or 2 weeks. Now, we were well set up from before where we had everybody on laptops, so it made the transition a bit easier. But I think the benefits going into the future of what we've done in the last 2 years will be great for all employees, and it will lend itself to well-being for employees to, I mean, we don't want to be sitting in traffic for 2 hours each way. I think those days are gone, but I think there is a bit of a hybrid solution there that's required, where there will be some people that will want to come into work in an office environment. But then again, I mean, you'll have people that will have family situations where they want to be one or 2 days at home. And as an employer, I think that's important that we embrace that as well. We want to keep the best employees, and I think this working from home is going to be probably the shining light, let's say, or something to shine out of this dark time. So yeah, I suppose remote working.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, David. You said it lends itself to well-being, this hybrid solution about remote working. I think we can all agree that, yeah, that was one of the hidden benefits for everybody working in industry. Ashling, we got cut off there. Are you okay to jump in?
Yeah, can you all hear me good now? Yeah, perfect.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so look, as I was kind of saying, right, for ourselves, right, with Accenture especially, like it's broken this kind of repetitive cycle that we were all stuck in, and it's allowed people while they're working from home to kind of figure out what works best for them, what's their balance, what's their dynamic, what's exactly has been said, what looks after their well-being best. So, you know, like for me, I have my dog at home, and you know, he can sit on my lap while I'm, you know, trying to think through something really difficult, or I get to bring him on walks at lunchtime, or I can go down and make myself something nice and fresh rather than, you know, a packed lunch that I probably made 2 days ago or something like that. I think redesigning and reassessing what does the average day look like for those office worker style jobs has been the biggest benefit of the pandemic for the industry.
Thanks, Ashling. What's your dog's name?
It's Milo, and he's a
Milo.
Cavachon.
I love it.
Yeah, if you Google it, they look like teddy bears.
Oh, very good. Yeah, so our next question, we'll go to David. David, have engineers been the hidden heroes over the last 2 years? Can you tell us about that?
I think so. I mean, if we go back to the very beginning, I suppose we didn't know what the situation was for our industry, and I think most industries was like that as well. The pandemic started, whether we were essential services. So I mean, we're working in the data center segments, the pharma segments, and in the hospitals. So I mean, they're deemed to be maintenance activities on those type of sites are deemed as essential services. So we had our engineers going to customer sites, and we talk about apprentices. So I mean, for my own business, we have a lead engineer and probably an apprentice with them going to jobs. So that traveling with two in a van there was a lot of uncertainty around whether we could do that, and it did make it difficult. We had probably only 3 or 4 days where we had guys sitting at home, but from then on, I mean, the guys have really stood up. They've it's been a difficult time for them. I mean, the families at home as well. We're asking them to go into hospital settings or data centers and work with our colleagues and contractors. They're getting antigen tests shoved at them, and this was constant for the last 2 years. And I mean, we still have this in the industry as well, but I think definitely they were our frontline workers. I mean, without them, we couldn't have looked after the customers or our own people ourselves. So I mean, they were the number one for us in looking after our customers.
Absolutely, and we're all grateful for those hidden heroes that are behind the scenes, that don't get a light on them. They're the engineers that are in, and the apprentices fixing, you know, the medical equipment and everything that you mentioned there. So thanks for that, David. Ashling, a lot of the world's greatest developments have come from extraordinary situations. So did your company find that this unique struggle have caused them to evaluate and improve their systems in a way they wouldn't have realized prior to the pandemic?
Yeah, absolutely. So like Accenture is a large consultant firm, right? And we sell our people, and our people are sent out to multiple different clients and companies across the world, and especially across Ireland. And all of our clients have different needs and different requirements. And some of them had already been doing remote working and similar kind of setups, maybe with hybrid. But a lot of clients, and specifically like my client, it was strictly in an office. I was in an office because, and rightly so, most of them had kind of concerns about moving to the cloud or security, or maybe they just didn't have the infrastructure there to support people working from home. So when the pandemic hit and most of us were forced to work from home, it caused a great concern that they had to go, well, wait, well, what can we do to get people back working? Because obviously having this highly educated and highly skilled workforce sitting at home, not being able to do their job is frustrating for both parties involved. But also, exactly as Dave was saying, there's people needed to keep the lights on. What can we do to make sure the lights are kept on and safely kept on? So for my client, there was a huge turnaround and a great effort on Accenture's part to build out this whole infrastructure and support system that could allow people like myself to be able to sit at home safely and still complete our job to the best of our ability, and to even at this stage now a higher standard than what we were able to complete when we were on site. Again, this is part of the hidden benefits, that we were able to kind of collaborate a little bit better with more teams across a broader area because we were remotely working, because they facilitated that. So there's a lot of small little different things that have been challenges along the way, but I think, you know, being able to go from physically having to stand in a data center on front of a, you know, a screen and a keyboard and a mouse typing away to try and fix something that might have broken, to now being able to sit at home and being able to remote in through various different security checkpoints and, you know, proof that I am who I say I am, to then get on safely and securely, to then be able to do my job, is it's a phenomenal turnaround to be able to implement that and to do it in the time frame that they did. I was sent home on a Friday, and by the next Wednesday I had this access. So there was a phenomenal effort, and like the work behind to get that in place, and the systems that were required were really intricate and difficult. So it was a big struggle, but now the client actually has this fantastic resource available to them that they can choose to continue to use and leverage going forward however they wish.
Yeah, some really good points there and some insights, Ashling. Thanks for sharing them with us. Ray, how have advancements in ICT, such as building information modeling, helped create more flexibility in education and work?
Yeah, I think it's really interesting when we look at the use of ICT and apprenticeship, I suppose, because apprenticeship is that very much face-to-face delivery. You see it, you do it, you repeat it, and you learn by seeing. So very quickly, we were one of the first actually back to face-to-face. And all through the 2 years of the pandemic, we still maintain face-to-face classes. But what we found was that the use of virtual learning environments became really popular and useful tools. They became almost an essential part of the toolbox. I think it's to say really an essential part of the toolbox and not the toolbox itself. So it became a tool in the complement of delivery of the staff. And very, very quickly we see in the virtual learning environment in the old DIT campus, which was Brightspace. So we were using that quite a lot, and it became really, really useful. So the students, we almost developed a hybrid system where we had 3 days of practical and 2 days of theory done online. So that kind of blended approach became really popular and was actually delivered across the country in most of the technological universities and IoTs. And it pointed out one of the things that perhaps will become a point of discussion later, is that different, even within TU Dublin, we have 3 or 2 virtual learning environments, depending on which campus you're on. So it created these slight difficulties for us, because students on one phase might come to one campus, but on their next phase might come to another campus. So they have to now experience completely different VLEs. So that's probably one of the learning things that's to come out of the pandemic in relation to apprenticeship. But as I say, I don't think it's going to go away. I think you'll see VLEs and that embedded because it turned out to be so useful. But I think the other thing I suppose to look at is within TU Dublin itself in the emerging university educational model. We've said that we're going to create digitally literate students. And it's now about how we're going to produce that and what's that going to look like into the future. Because we're also committed to 1/3 of courses being delivered by mixed modalities. So like apprenticeship is going to continue, part-time is going to continue. And within that, the ICT structure is really going to have to be central and really strong.
Thanks, Ray, for that. And it's good to hear about the virtual learning environments and its success as well over the pandemic. And into the future as well with this new education model and the blended approach. And it's great, it'll benefit for all students and staff. Can I go to, I'm like this, who we go to next? David, what are some of the new developments in engineering that have emerged from the pandemic?
Yeah, good question. Yeah, just to touch on maybe something Ray was talking about there, is that we had, I mean, our businesses, we manufacture medium voltage switchgear, and we would do it on a project basis. So somewhere near completion of project, we would have customers at factory sites doing FATs, factory acceptance tests. So I mean, as soon as the pandemic started, this couldn't be done. So we had to adapt. We had to have guys in the factory walking around with mobile phones, pointing at switchgear, pressing buttons. But I think most industries did, and I think especially with engineering, we always find a way, we find a solution, or we're always thinking of trying to find a way to find a solution. And I think probably early on in the pandemic, there was a lot of engineering companies, especially in Ireland, that were converting their processes, whether it was just for making masks or trying to make breathing machines. Some of the other things within our industry, probably VR is something now that's it's gaining traction within the industry, where we have customers with mobile apps pointing at equipment, whether it's for commissioning or troubleshooting. I'm just trying to think, our own colleagues in ABB and Cylon here developed a smart sensor then for rooms, so for meeting rooms. So when we did, or when we do eventually go back into work environments and office environments, they've had this smart fusion center that's measuring the carbon dioxide and the humidity and temperature in the room, and can feed back to a BMS system and change the airflow. So smart things like that, and I think we can see it across most of the sectors, that there's needs must. So things were developed because of the situation we were in, which is great.
Thanks, David. Some really good points there, and it's great to hear about new developments coming down the line as well. And when you mentioned VR, is that virtual reality?
Virtual reality, yeah.
Okay, yeah.
So in some cases, it's a headset and it's glasses, but it doesn't need to be like that. I mean, it can be as simple as a laptop and somebody with an iPhone or a smartphone.
Okay, brilliant. That's really interesting there. Thanks so much. So we'll go to Ashling again. Ashling, for you personally, has there been any benefits of working from home during the pandemic?
That's a phenomenal question, I think, Rebecca, because me 2019 versus me now is like, there's a huge difference. So primarily one of my goals was I always wanted to do a master's, as you mentioned, I'm currently doing. This wouldn't have been feasible if it wasn't for the pandemic. So the work that I do and the effort that I put into my day job meant that I didn't really have much time spare to be working on it on a master's in the evening, because you usually be tired, or your brain would be fried after solving some difficult problems. But also on top of that, having to take time away from the office wasn't always a viable option for me. Whereas now, because of the pandemic, one, because I'm working from home, I have a little bit of flexibility in regards to, like, I don't have to be in the office, so I can be wherever I need to be to do my work. But also two, the course that I'm taking, my master's, is all online now as well. Now, in fairness, before the pandemic, they had some capability of doing remote learning, but the whole course now is online, which means that I can do it in the evenings or at the weekends whenever suits me. So I can attend lectures whenever I have free time, which wouldn't have been feasible during normal pre-pandemic kind of semesters and stuff like that. The second and most important, I think, change for me was working from home brought about new questions for me and how I work and how I function. So previously, when I would have been in the office, there would have been things like everybody has stuff that they struggle with, and they kind of go, right, well, I'm late to the office, a couple of days a week. Oh, well, I'll grow out of that. I'll get used to it. I'll get into my rhythm. Or I'm really, really struggling, with prioritizing my tasks or stuff like that. And when I went to work, started working from home, once we got sent home, I started realizing some of the things that I was struggling with in the office, and I was blaming them on, oh, it's just a busy, noisy place and I'm a chatty person, or the traffic is always terrible, or whatever it might be. These issues never really went away. They always stayed on a base layer. And so I sought support and advice, and I ended up going for an assessment and got diagnosed with ADHD combined type, which, for anyone who's not familiar, means I have both the hyperactive and inattentive type of ADHD. So I've got a mishmash of them both. But this, as a result, then allowed me to kind of reassess myself, reassess how I work, how I learn, how I function as a person. And now that's opened up a huge door of accessibility for me. So from my master's, I'm registered with the Disability Learning Support Services, and I'm now starting to achieve the best grades I've ever achieved academically that I never thought I could get. From a work perspective, I'm now getting support and tools and techniques and check-ins from people within the office that's allowed me to get promoted recently, where I thought that it wasn't going to be coming for a long time down the road. So having this kind of new lens put on my life allowed me to reassess and start towards goals that I thought I would never get a chance to do, like the master's. but then also get a diagnosis that has completely changed and improved my quality of life in work, in academia, and outside in my day-to-day life. So huge benefits for me. I'm lots and lots of silver linings to this pandemic for me.
Thank you so much, Ashling, for sharing that personal experience as well. I think it's really important, and it really resonates with me personally and with everybody. Yeah, so thanks for that. And I just wanted to kind of add as well that it's really important. You mentioned there, like, you know, that you're a young woman, you know, you're doing your master's, and then you've sought out this diagnosis later on in life. And it's great that we're using this platform to encourage other young women to get diagnosed, like, you know, and that neurodiversity, you know, to bring awareness about that and to bring our knowledge about neurodiversity as well. And that we all need to foster kind of more inclusivity, whether it's at home, whether it's at work, in the community, in education settings, and whenever we can possible. So thank you again, Ashling, for sharing that. So if we can go to David again there. David, has the pandemic created more awareness around sustainability?
I think for everybody it has. I mean, if we think about sustainability, we talk about environment, and then probably social progress and resources, let's say. So I mean, for ourselves at home, we're looking at the amount of electricity we're using, or we're looking at recycling in the green bins and brown bins. And I think one of the good things about the pandemic is that when you're sitting at home, you're going, oh, there's a lot of waste going in the wrong bins here. So that you try to do something yourself locally. I suppose when you look back at the pandemic, maybe even look at traffic. No traffic. It was. I mean, that has to be a good thing for the environment as well. I think here in ABB we've pledged to globally our fleet will move to EV by 2030. So I think we've made some inroads here in Ireland and converting the fleet here as well. I suppose on the social progress, it's all about well-being and health and safety of employees. One of the things from the pandemic was, as our speakers have touched on, is people working at home, a lot of cases on their own, isolation. And it's just really being part of the team. The things that we did have before the pandemic, where you were in an office environment, or you walked to a coffee machine and you talked to somebody, maybe just chit chat, you lose that on Teams, because on Teams you're just getting this 15-minute, half-hour slots into your calendar, and it's business specific. There's very little for anything outside of that. So I think what we did early on was we had this coffee chats where we put a half an hour in the diary for the teams, just to talk about anything else other than business. We did safety observational tours as part of our health and safety on the sites when the service guys were there, but we turned them into well-being surveys. So contacting employees and just going through a checklist of how are you doing today and what's going on, and trying not to talk about the business KPIs, but more to do with themselves personally and how they're getting on working from home. Is it difficult? And I know from Ashling's point of view as well, I have a dog at home that used to want to be on all the Zoom calls. So then the postman comes to the door and the dog goes mad, and like, that's life. I mean, I think we've embraced that. That's the good thing about sustainability. We've embraced that, and I suppose what we're trying to do as a company is carbon. We're trying to get to carbon neutral. We're trying not to put waste into landfill. Yeah, I suppose we're trying to do the right thing, and it's not just in our industry, and we're all trying to do the right thing at all levels with diversity, inclusion, and I suppose that's for this topic we're talking about apprenticeships and women in apprenticeships. I mean, diversity and inclusion is a big one for all of us. So I think that's that's where I see us on the sustainability, but it's not just a company thing. It's personally, I think we've all taken it on board now.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, David, for that. If we go to Ray now, Ray, can you tell us more about the development of a national virtual online learning resource for apprentices and the impact it will have for them?
Yeah, I think two things I'm going to say in that relation to it is, one, I think the lens of the pandemic has forced us to look at the way we use ICT. And I think I mentioned earlier on this connectivity piece and apprenticeships being delivered all over the place, you know, in multiple institutes, that we're not all using the same VLE. And I think it's put a focus on the likes of Lillis, who would have the national responsibility for apprenticeship, to look at their own e-college. And I think that's undergoing a huge investment to provide continuous access from the start of your apprenticeship right the way through. And I think that's to be welcomed. And I think in TU Dublin, of course, we will have our own input into that as well, being one of the major providers of apprenticeship. But I think also out of the pandemic, some other things came up in apprenticeship, I think, that are really interesting. So there's a tool, and you mentioned there earlier, Rebecca, called building information modeling. And it's primarily used in the construction industry. But it became a tool of communication to apprentices, where people, as David pointed out, you couldn't have two people in the van. So what they were doing is they were using building information modeling, which details everything in the building. So even down to the apprentice level, an apprentice electrician was able to get communication to tell him what piece of work he needed to do. Now he could access that on his mobile phone through the cloud. And he could see the piece of work that he needed to do. Once he completed, he was able to sign it off and tag it. And that's there for the future. So we know who did that piece of work at some stage into the future. Your painter and decorator is able to look at the information on building information modeling and see what color that wall is supposed to be. And he's able to then do that piece of work, and he's able to tag it off. So it became a real interesting communication tool. Not one of its primary purposes when it was developed, but it shows the way, as David, I think, also earlier pointed out, the adaptive nature of what we had to do, and people thinking on their feet and using technology to be able to continue to work. But I think also out of that, then it raises another really interesting concept for me in relation to, if we look at the digitization, particularly in the construction industry, there's a lot of off-site work now, but there's also, you know, the traditional on-site in the assembly and manufacture. And it's traditionally been, you know, viewed as hard hats, high vis, and hammers. Hard hats and high vis are not going to go away, but I think we're going to see more of the laptops, you know, and the iPhones being used. And it's what that creates for us, and it's the opportunities that it creates, that it breaks down these barriers, that construction is only about that hard assembly stuff. So, and I think it's going to give us one of the greatest opportunities to actually widen available careers, particularly to females in that industry, you know, because it's seen as dirty and hard. And there's actually a whole technology side of it that's emerging now with the use of these tools, you know, right from the start to the very finish of any of these projects. And I think that's a particularly interesting area that we should all look at in the future.
Thanks, Ray. And those opportunities that you spoke about is relevant to the next question. So we'll stick with you, Ray, for this one. How do you think that the pandemic has impacted future careers for our third level students and apprenticeship students?
I think what it's done is it's going to widen the scope of careers. I think where people would have, as I think it was pointed out again earlier on, people would have been in one career set. They're actually looking at the opportunities that are out there, and there's so many at the moment. You know, you can now do an apprenticeship right away up to level 10. So previously they were all at level 6. So the scope is where you stand. You've now got multiple steps to add on to any career, and the number of those are widening every year. I think we went from 25 apprenticeships to 63 currently. There's another 10 to 15 in development. So that whole area is going to widen even further. And I think even as we look, as we discussed earlier, maybe in our own technological university in Dublin and the university education model, we're looking at multiple pathways in, multiple pathways out. We're looking at connectivity between further education and higher education. So it just becomes an education system. People can come in, do modules, go back to work. So that interface between work and education actually becomes almost seamless. People are in for a period of time, back to work. So as we understood it, the old apprenticeship system of earn and learn actually will become the norm in many ways, regardless of what course you're doing, whether it's further ed, higher ed, undergraduate, postgraduate, or apprenticeship. I think that's one of the real benefits that we're going to see. And I'm delighted that TU Dublin is actually taking the lead on this. I think it's really important, particularly in the areas that we work in.
Thanks, Ray, for that. Yeah, those multiple pathways in and out. You've given some really great advice about about everything there about apprenticeships, and it's great to hear that you can progress with apprenticeships all the way to level 10 as well, and it's going to be more opportunities for everybody. So thanks again, Ray. I'm going to stick with this question. Could I ask Ashling that question as well? So how do you think that the pandemic has impacted future careers for students and apprentices and apprenticeship students? And all students.
Yeah, for all students in general, like specifically for myself, obviously speaking from being in industry, but also being a part-time student at the moment, I think this model of being able to provide education remotely opens up a lot of doors and helps remove a lot of barriers that would have been there for people. Like I said myself, I'm in a position whereby I had the resources to do a master's, but I didn't have the time because I couldn't get off to get into the traditional class setting. Whereas this remote support system that's in place now facilitated that. I remember when I was in college and I was working part-time and I was working crazy hours and then happened to be in college for crazy hours just to get through all my material. It'll take away a little bit of that barrier, that you can have that flexibility that, okay, well, look, if you need to work your job and they need you in Monday from 9 to 5, well, you could do your Monday lectures in the evening maybe, or something like that, or work around your labs or whatever's needed there. From an industry perspective, like absolutely, there's a huge shift that people are now getting to see the broader ranges of what's available out there, and they're kind of getting to do touch on different points in it through academia. Like from my own modules I'm taking at the moment, there's so much branching out comparison to what previously would have been there, but also in the workspace, like from working with a lot of the teams here, because we're remote, they're trying to have greater transparency and greater connectivity between everybody. So they're doing these, brown bag sessions where at lunchtime you might hop on a call, they'll tell you about what's going on in the world of Accenture, what people are working on, what teams are out there, what skills they need. And it allows people to kind of figure out what they want to do and where they want to go. Much like myself, I started out as a software engineer and I realized I'm actually kind of far too interested in how everything works, and I like to have my finger in every pie. So I moved into Tech Arc because it allows me to do a little bit of software engineering, allows me to do a bit of project management, allows me to do hardware and a little bit of everything, right? It also allows, when we have new joiners, it'll take away some of those barriers that, if you have someone who's after studying in Cork and now they're having to move up to Dublin, well, if they're remote working, they don't have to necessarily move straight up to Dublin and try and compete for rents, or try and figure out how to commute and get in and out. They can sit at home in Cork. Like a lot of my friends from the office, they went back home to their family homes, and then we're able to figure out, well, actually, I don't want to live at home anymore. I didn't like it at the start, but I don't have to move back into Dublin. So there's a lot of these nice little things that allow a greater ease of transition for people who want to continue on in education, or those going from education into the workforce, and that kind of blending of them and facilitating it, really.
Thanks, Ashling. Some great advice there. Thank you so much. And David, so this is our last question then. And again, it's the same question to you. So how do you think the pandemic has impacted future careers for our third level students, apprenticeship students, and all students?
Yeah, maybe just to support Amy and Ray. I mean, the first thing I would say is our attractiveness as an employer is very, very important nowadays. So, I mean, you have to be able to attract talent, and to attract talent, you have to offer hybrid working solutions. So whether that's working from home or the office environment, there has to be that solution there for all employees. So whether they're working in Dublin, and as actually said, outside of Dublin as well. So you have to offer that to be attractive as an employer. And maybe just touch back to what Ray said. I mean, I totally agree. I mean, the traditional electrician, when I started my time back so many years ago, it's different today. I mean, it's electrical apprenticeship meets ICT meets IT. And that's what customers are looking for now, because when we're selling in products and solutions, customers want to know what their equipment is doing morning, noon, and night. So they're looking for data coming from electrical switchgear sent to cloud, and then they need somebody at the cloud then to look at this information and decide whether it's preventative maintenance, whether it's reactive maintenance, whether it's real time. Or whether we can push out maintenance schedules, reducing costs. So those things I would say are the two things I would say is, yeah, you have to be attractive as an employer by the remote working, but also the apprenticeship program has changed so much over the years. I would say going into that electrical apprenticeship now, I'll be very, very excited.
Thanks, David, for that, and highlighting all the great routes as well, and how important it is for apprenticeships as well. And it'll be the new norm in the future. So listen, we're coming to the end now. So I just wanted to thank everybody, the panelists, and for Deirdre Lillis, our keynote speaker. We're so grateful for your time here. I'll just quickly ask Michelle to talk about the survey.
Yeah, thanks, Rebecca. Look, we're delighted to have everyone here, and we'd really value your feedback. So we have a short survey that we'll send you at the end of the event. So thanks very much. And it only takes a few minutes.
Thanks, Michelle, for that. Okay, thanks. Bye.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye-bye. Thank you. Bye.
Cheers. Thanks all.